A few months later, Gerald proposed to me, and not long after that, we got married. It felt like a dream come true. I couldn't thank God enough because I truly believed He had finally answered my prayers after all those years of waiting. Gerald and I traveled for our honeymoon, and it was beautiful. We laughed a lot, talked endlessly, and made so many plans for the future. We discussed when we would start having children, and even talked about how many kids we wanted. It felt like everything in my life was finally falling into place. After the honeymoon, we returned home and began our real married life together. At first, everything seemed perfect. There were no fights. There were no communication problems. Everything felt peaceful. Sometimes I wish things had stayed that way forever. But 2 months later, I started noticing something strange. Whenever Gerald came home from work and I hugged him, I could smell alcohol on him.
Don't overthink.
At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. But the smell kept coming back again and again. One evening, I finally asked him about it. He looked at me with disbelief and said, "How do you see me? Why would I be drinking?"
I've been
His
smelling alcohol
response made me
lately.
feel
Are you
foolish
drinking?
for even
How do you see me?
asking.
Why are we drinking?
But the smell
sorry,
never
maybe I'm
stopped.
mistaken.
One day, I asked him again. This time, his reaction was very different. Before I even realized what was happening, he slapped me. I stood there in complete shock. Did he really just hit me? This was the same man who had proudly told me during our courtship that he would never raise his hand against a woman. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Little did I know that moment was the beginning of everything. The beginning of the real Gerald. The next morning, he apologized. He said work had been extremely stressful and that he had lost control for a moment. I accepted his apology. But something else started happening. Gerald began making me feel like I was going crazy. Even though I knew the smell on him was alcohol, he constantly denied it. He questioned my own senses. Later that evening, he came home with flowers to apologize again. I tried to convince myself everything would get better. But things only got worse. One night, Gerald and I were being intimate like normal married couples. But suddenly he started asking me to do things I had never heard of before. Things I wasn't comfortable with. In that moment, I couldn't help but ask myself, was this really the same Christian man I had married? When I told him I couldn't do what he was asking, he became angry. He threatened me, saying there were many women outside who were willing to do those things for him. I felt trapped. Our marriage was barely 6 months old, and already everything was falling apart. Soon,
I'm not
the
comfortable.
abuse became
There are
worse.
women outside
If
who would
Gerald
gladly
came
do it.
home and his food wasn't ready, he beat me. If the food was cold, he beat me. Almost every night, he came home drunk. I was suffering, but I couldn't tell anyone. I felt ashamed. One day, I gathered the courage to speak to the pastor who had counseled us during our courtship. The pastor invited Gerald and spoke with him. Gerald promised he would change. But when we got home that day, Gerald gave me the worst beating of my life. He warned me never to report him to anyone again. Every night after that, I cried myself to sleep. I kept asking myself the same painful questions. Did I make a mistake? What did I do to deserve this? After so many years of waiting, was this what marriage had brought me? Things only got worse as time passed. Gerald forced me to stop working. Whenever I tried to convince him otherwise, he would beat me and remind me that wives were supposed to submit to their husbands. I watched everything I had worked so hard to build begin to fall apart. My fashion business was my passion. It was the one thing that gave me purpose. So secretly, I asked my sister to help run it for the time being. But eventually Gerald found out. When he did, he became furious. He threatened to divorce me if I didn't shut the business down immediately. I was terrified. What would people say? How would my parents feel? All my friends were still married. I didn't want to be the one everyone talked about. So I shut the business down. Everything I had built disappeared. Even after forcing me to stop working, Gerald still refused to take proper care of me. He gave me very little money for food. And whenever I complained, he insulted me and shouted at me. Then one Saturday evening, during one of his usual beatings, I collapsed. He rushed me to the hospital. That was when we discovered I was pregnant. Instead of being happy, Gerald told me to abort the baby. But this time,
You
I
have to
stood my
abort it.
ground.
Now.
I told
I
him
won't
no.
do it.
Children
Then
are
you're
gifts
on
from
your
God.
own.
But he warned me that if I kept the baby, I would raise it alone because he would never take responsibility. Even with his threats, I decided to keep the baby. But a few weeks later, Gerald brought one of his girlfriends into our home. Into our matrimonial home. This time, I couldn't take it anymore. I chased the girl out. When Gerald found out, he became furious. He started beating me again. During the beating, I suddenly noticed blood running down my legs. He rushed me to the hospital. That was when the doctors told us something heartbreaking.
The baby couldn't survive.
I had lost the baby. That night, I cried like I had never cried before. I felt broken, empty, useless, weak. I felt like I had lost everything. And slowly, I stopped fighting. I simply endured the marriage. One day, Gerald finally told me the truth. He said he never married me because he loved me. He married me because his parents were pressuring him to settle down. And he chose me because he wanted a quiet Christian woman who would not question him while he enjoyed his life. That confession shattered me completely. That was the day I gave up on life. I finally understood something painful. Not everything that glitters is gold. Sometimes the people who look perfect are hiding the darkest hearts. And if there is one thing I have learned from my story, it is this. No matter how perfect someone appears, always pray before making such a big decision. Because some people pretend to be who they are not, just to get what they want.